Welcome to the Sleeptime History channel. Here we create immersive first-person stories from the pages of history, told gently through the eyes of those who lived them. Each episode invites you to step into moments of the past. Walk quietly beside emperors, explorers, revolutionaries, and forgotten heroes, not as distant names, but as real people experiencing history firsthand. Our aim is simple: to help you relax, transport you somewhere peaceful, and guide you gently into sleep. If you've enjoyed this experience, please consider liking and subscribing. It genuinely helps our channel grow, enabling us to create more soothing content for you. And if you'd like to leave a comment, we'd love to hear which historical figures or moments you'd like us to cover next. Your ideas inspire future episodes. Thank you for joining us. Now, relax and let history carry you softly towards sleep. In this episode, we journey into the final 7 days of Adolf Hitler's life, told from his own quiet, internal perspective. Each moment is explored with calm and care, offering a contemplative glimpse into history as the world above descends into silence. Spoken gently, this story is designed to help you unwind, slow your thoughts, and ease into restful sleep. Now take a deep breath and let the past drift quietly around you. Day 1, April 23rd, 1945. The silence in the bunker is deceptive. Though the walls are thick and built for survival, they cannot keep out the distant thunder of artillery that rolls across the ruined landscape of Berlin above. I wake slowly, not from a restful sleep, but from a restless haze. Time here is no longer measured by clocks or sunlight, but by the distant, rhythmic tremble of the ground beneath us. I rise from the narrow bed, bones aching with age and weariness. My body feels heavier than ever before, as though gravity has thickened in these final days. The concrete above and below presses in, not just physically, but emotionally. This place, once envisioned as a fortress, feels more like a crypt with each passing hour. I move methodically, shave, wash, dress, clinging to routine as though it might delay the inevitable. My uniform hangs loosely now. I have lost weight these past weeks. Food, once an indulgence, has become an afterthought. Appetite is a casualty of despair. The mirror reflects a man I no longer recognize. The sharpness in the eyes is gone, replaced with a kind of vacant resignation. Outside the room, the corridors are dim, lined with the pale yellow of weak bulbs that buzz faintly with electricity. Guards nod as I pass, their expressions unreadable. They are tired too. We all are. Some of them are mere boys, faces still smooth, eyes wide. Others are hardened, but even they look hollowed out. Ghosts wearing uniforms. Goebbels is waiting in the map room. He speaks quickly, animated, still fervent in his belief, or at least in his performance of belief. He tells me that we must hold the city, that the spirit of the German people remains unbroken. I nod, but I no longer believe in the war or in the spirit he invokes. It is all smoke and mirrors now, rhetoric for the sake of ritual. I ask for updates from the front. The reports are bleak. The Red Army continues its advance. The ring around Berlin tightens. I ask about General Steiner's group, the supposed counterattack. I am told they cannot move. I know then, fully and without delusion, that there will be no last-minute salvation. No miracle on the horizon. The rage comes unbidden. I slam my fist against the table, shout until my throat aches. The officers stand in silence. They do not argue. They do not defend. Their silence is more damning than any rebuttal. It tells me what I already know. They have given up. Or worse, they never believed to begin with. Later I meet with Ava. She's calm, composed, radiant, even in this darkness. She smiles as though the world outside these walls is not disintegrating. She asks me how I am, and I tell her I'm fine. We both know it is a lie, but we sit together, close, drinking tea that tastes of iron and dust. She wears her favourite dress today, sky blue with white trim. Her perfume lingers in the stale air, defying the rot that creeps into everything. I ask her if she regrets staying. She shakes her head. I would rather be here with you, she says, no matter what happens. Her words land heavily, not because they surprise me, but because they sound so final. I do not deserve such loyalty, but I am grateful for it nonetheless. Blondie lies near my feet as we talk. She stirs now and then, ears twitching at the distant echoes of war. I scratch behind her ears and she relaxes, tail thumping once against the floor. She does not understand, but she senses something. Dogs always do. As evening falls, I review documents at my desk, orders to units that no longer exist, communications to generals whose lines have gone silent. The theatre of command persists, even as the stage crumbles. I dictate a few letters, my voice low and flat. I speak to posterity, or perhaps to no one. It feels performative, like reading lines in a play that has already ended. Dinner is subdued. The table is smaller now. Many have fled or found reasons not to dine with me. The food is plain. Potatoes, some preserved meat, stale bread. I chew without tasting. Conversations are sparse, and when they happen, they avoid the topic that looms above all else. No one says the word surrender. No one mentions what comes next. Afterwards, I return to my quarters. I pick up a pen and begin to write. Not speeches or proclamations, but personal thoughts, private reflections. I write of how history may remember me. I wonder how much of it will be truth and how much invention. I write of fate, of betrayal, of disillusionment. The words come slowly, dragged from the mire of exhaustion. The light above me flickers, then steadies. I pause, listening to the rumble above ground, closer now. Each explosion sounds like the beating of some terrible drum. I feel the vibrations through my feet. Berlin is being crushed piece by piece. The city that once roared with speeches and parades now weeps in silence. I lie in bed without undressing. The ceiling above me feels lower than it did this morning. The air is thick, metallic. I close my eyes and try to summon images from better times. Green fields, mountain air, the applause of crowds. But the images fade quickly, replaced by smoke, by rubble, by silence. Tomorrow I will wake again. The end is near, and yet the days stretch on. Slow and surreal, each moment heavier than the last. And so I sleep, fitfully, perhaps mercifully, while the world I built collapses above me. Day 2, April 24th, 1945. Time has become elastic here. Each hour stretches on, and yet the days blur together. When I woke this morning, I was unsure if it was still yesterday. The rhythm of life inside this bunker is a monotone loop of rituals and whispers. There is no sunlight, no birdsong, only the low, relentless hum of electric lights and the occasional distant thunder of shell fire pressing down from above. I rise slowly, feeling the stiffness in my joints. My body betrays my age more with each passing hour. My limbs ache, my breath shortens. I dress carefully, deliberately, maintaining a sense of control where I can. The uniform is as much armour now as it ever was. Outside, the world may be collapsing, but inside these walls, I cling to formality like a drowning man to a floating plank. In the hallway, I nod to a young soldier posted near the entrance to the conference room. He avoids my gaze. Perhaps out of fear or shame. Perhaps he sees me for what I have become, a ghost haunting a bunker beneath a city of fire. I meet with Bormann and Goebbels again. Their presence is constant now, orbiting me like moons around a dying planet. Bormann is sharp, methodical, always managing details, shielding me from distractions. Goebbels is impassioned, his words still soaked in ideology, always trying to inspire, to push back against the inevitable. But even he falters today. He tells me of radio reports from the West. Roosevelt is dead. I barely react. That news, which weeks ago might have given us cause for hope, now feels irrelevant. The Americans press on regardless. It changes nothing. We discuss our options. Not strategy, there is no strategy left, but logistics. Should we stay? Should we flee? The questions are rhetorical. I have made my decision. I will not leave Berlin. My place is here, among the ruins. I ask again about Steiner's forces. The response is quiet, apologetic. He has not attacked. He cannot. I nod. The thread of possibility we once clung to has frayed and snapped. There will be no breakout, no miraculous encirclement, only collapse. After the meeting, I retreat to my quarters. I sit with Ava for a while. She is always composed, almost unnervingly so. She reads, sketches, folds linens, anything to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I ask her what she's reading today. A novel, she says, something light. The title escapes me now. We speak little, but her presence comforts me. In a strange way, she reminds me that I'm still human, still a man, not merely a symbol weighed down by history. She hums quietly as she pours tea. Her voice is soft, nearly drowned out by the faint crumbling of the world above. I stroke Blondie's head as she lies by my chair. Her ears twitch occasionally, reacting to sounds none of us can hear. Her loyalty is unconditional, her gaze free of judgment. I envy her simplicity. Her world is this room, this moment. She does not carry the weight of past decisions or fear for what is to come. Later in the day, I dictate my political testament. It is a difficult task, not because I lack words, but because I no longer believe in them. Still, I persist. I craft each sentence with care, trying to shape the memory that will be left behind. I speak of betrayal, of duty, of vision. I try to explain, to justify, though I know history will render its own judgment. I revise the phrasing about Himmler. His treachery too is confirmed. He has sought negotiations with the Allies, my most trusted lieutenants, abandoning me in the final hours. Goering, Himmler, the old guard disintegrates before my eyes. Their betrayals wound me, but not because of the personal slight. It is the shattering of the myth of unity, of loyalty. Even they have given up. I call for the testaments to be typed and signed. I insist on witnesses, not out of legality, but symbolism. I want this moment documented, engraved into the official memory. It is an act of legacy, not hope. Dinner is quieter than the night before. A few trusted aides join us. Ava sits beside me, smiling politely, making conversation when others will not. The food is meagre: canned meat, some boiled potatoes, dry bread. We eat mechanically. The war has reached even our table. There is no wine, no laughter. Afterward, I speak briefly with the guards. I thank them for their service. One of them, barely more than a boy, nods silently. I wonder what he truly thinks. Does he still believe in the cause, or is he simply waiting for the final order? Before retiring, I walk the corridor alone. My footsteps echo on the cold floor, the sound amplified by the tightness of the space. The walls feel closer than they did yesterday, the ceiling lower. The bunker, once a stronghold, now feels like the inside of a coffin. I stop at the door to the communications room. Inside, operators speak in hushed tones. They pass messages with solemn efficiency. Each one is another nail in the coffin of the Reich. I listen to a dispatch from the north, silence. From the south, chaos. From the west, advance. There is no relief. There is no redemption. I return to my quarters and sit quietly. Eva has prepared the bed, turned down the blanket. I do not lie down. Instead, I sit at the edge, hands clasped, staring at the floor. The hours drag on. I think of my youth, of Vienna, of the trenches in 1914. I think of the long journey from painter to politician, from dreamer to despot. How strange, how far I have come, and now how close the end is. Blondie rests beside me, and I stroke her head one more time. The light above buzzes faintly, casting shadows that seem to reach for me. Tomorrow I will wake again, and I will begin the preparations. Day 3, April 25th, 1945. Another day begins, though the term feels hollow. Morning arrives not with sunlight or the chirping of birds, but with the same humming lights and muffled footsteps that signal the rotation of shifts. The air is thick, warm, slightly metallic, filled with the breath of too many people and too little space. I do not sleep well. I drift between restless thoughts and shallow unconsciousness. My dreams, when they come, are fragmented, a tangle of speeches, parades, shadows, and the sound of distant boots on cobblestone streets. I awaken unsure of what is memory and what is dream. The first thing I hear upon rising is the sound of a shell striking nearby, close enough to rattle dust from the ceiling. The bunker shudders. Eva stirs, her hand reaching for mine beneath the thin blanket. We say nothing. Words feel inadequate now, and there is a strange comfort in silence. I wash at the basin. The water is tepid. I scrape a razor across my jaw, watching my reflection distort slightly in the old mirror. My face is drawn, the skin tight over sharp cheekbones. The man staring back at me does not look like the one who once stood before adoring crowds. He looks small, tired, diminished by time, failure, and the steady crush of inevitability. Outside the room, the corridor is unusually quiet. Fewer staff remain each day. Some have found reasons to leave, orders elsewhere, assignments suddenly needing attention. Others have chosen to stay, for reasons I try not to examine too closely. Loyalty, fear, fatalism. I take breakfast alone, if it can be called that. Black bread, weak coffee. My appetite has long since vanished. Food has become a chore, a ritual like any other. The act of eating is a gesture toward normalcy, even if the taste turns to ash in my mouth. Later, I meet with the inner circle. Goebbels, ever the zealot, speaks of perseverance. He quotes Schopenhauer and speaks of the will. His eyes gleam with something feverish, but even he seems more tired today. His words have lost their rhythm. They feel like echoes of earlier speeches, echoes of a world that no longer listens. Bormann presents logistical updates, his tone flat, mechanical. The Soviets are now within 2 kilometers. The Reich Chancellery is in ruins. The garden has been cratered. Shells strike closer each hour. Some say the tanks can be heard from the upper levels. We discuss the situation with Goering. His telegram has been intercepted. A clear bid for power, assuming I was incapacitated. I sign the order to place him under arrest. There is no hesitation in my hand, only a strange numbness. Goering, once so central to the movement, has shown his true colours. The betrayal does not sting. It confirms what I already know. The circle is broken. Loyalty dissolves under pressure. The news from Himmler follows soon after. He too seeks terms with the Allies. Another crack. Another splinter. My supposed right hand, seeking peace in my name, without my consent. I have spent so many years forging a myth of unity, and now that myth lies in pieces at my feet. In the afternoon, I retreat to my private study. I sit at the desk for a long time, staring at the blank page. The testament lies beside it, already signed, but unfinished in spirit. What else is there to say? I have documented my final thoughts, my final orders, my final judgments. Still, the silence begs for ink. Eva joins me for tea. She wears a pale yellow dress today, wrinkled but clean. She smiles, and for a moment, the bunker feels less oppressive. Her presence is grounding, even as everything else unravels. We speak quietly. She tells me about a holiday she once took to Lake Garda before the war. I listen, not to the words but to the rhythm of her voice, software calm, as though the world outside these walls was still whole. Blondie lies near the heater, her breathing slow. I scratch behind her ears. She closes her eyes. I wonder how she will react when it finally happens, when the walls shudder one last time, when the guns fall silent, not from retreat, but from victory. Not ours, of course. Theirs. As night approaches, I call the secretaries to my office. I thank them for their work. They are polite, professional. I see fear in their eyes, though they try to hide it. I give them the opportunity to leave. Some refuse, some hesitate. I do not press them. Everyone here is already caught in the gravity of the end. Dinner is subdued. Goebbels brings his family. His children sit quietly, unaware of the weight pressing down around them. Their innocence is almost unbearable. I watch them speak to Eva, giggling at something she says, and I feel something twist in my chest, something like guilt or sorrow, perhaps both. After dinner, I speak briefly with the guards. Their faces are drawn, their uniforms dusty. They do not ask questions, they salute, and I return the gesture. Ceremony persists, even in ruins. Back in my quarters, I try to read from an old book of German poetry. The words blur. I read the same stanza 3 times, unable to retain the meaning. My thoughts drift. I think of Linz, of my childhood, of standing at the riverbank, watching the Danube flow steadily toward the horizon. I think of Vienna, of art school, of the cold nights spent sketching beneath gas lamps. I think of Munich, of the early meetings in beer halls, of voices raised in anger and in hope. And I think of how far those days are now, how distant and unreachable. The walls groan again. Another impact. Dust drifts from the ceiling like snow. I do not flinch. I have grown used to it. I lie down on the bed, still dressed. Eva sits beside me, brushing her hair. We say little. There is nothing new to say. Tomorrow I will begin planning for the final act. Not as a leader, but as a man who understands that the curtain must fall. Not in fear, not in rage, but with a strange calm acceptance. The end is close enough to taste, and I am no longer afraid. Day 4, April 26th, 1945. I wake to the low, constant groaning of the earth above. It is no longer a sound that startles, but one that blankets everything, an ambient chorus of collapse. Dust sprinkles down in silent intervals, landing on the foot of the bed, gathering in corners like snow inside a forgotten house. The bunker is still standing, but the world it hides from has already fallen. My body feels heavier today. Each movement is a negotiation. I sit up slowly, rubbing my temples. My head throbs with a dull ache, the kind that lingers not from illness, but from the weight of thought. There is no natural light in here, only the stale orange glow of the overhead fixtures. They hum faintly, flickering every so often, like even the electricity has grown weary. Eva is already awake, brushing her hair at the small table across from me. She catches my eye in the mirror and smiles softly, her expression warm and unchanged despite the chaos that surrounds us. I marvel at her ability to remain composed. Perhaps it's strength, perhaps denial, perhaps she simply believes that love is best expressed, not in grand gestures, but in quiet constancy. I dress in silence. The fabric of my uniform feels stiff, unfamiliar. It fits more loosely than before. I have grown thinner, more brittle. When I button the collar, my hands shake briefly. I steady them against the edge of the desk, pretending it is nothing. The hallway outside is dim. The fluorescent tubes cast long shadows across the walls. I nod to the few guards still stationed there. Their uniforms are rumpled, their eyes sunken. They've stopped standing at full attention. No one corrects them. Breakfast is waiting. Black bread, a slice of canned meat, weak tea. I force it down, not out of hunger, but obligation. To eat is to maintain the illusion of routine, of control. I wonder how many more meals there will be. At the morning briefing, the news grows bleaker still. The Soviets have reached Wilhelmstrasse. The rumble of tanks is now unmistakable above ground. I am told the Reich Chancellery is a ruin. Windows shattered, marble scorched, the once proud architecture now cratered and defiled. Bormann reads out reports in a flat monotone. Goebbels offers commentary, still clinging to the notion of endurance. He uses phrases like final resistance and noble sacrifice. His rhetoric is polished but hollow. I suspect he knows it too. Behind his words, there is desperation. A man speaking not to rally others, but to convince himself. We discuss the defence of the bunker. Some officers speak of escape, of finding routes through the underground tunnels to reach the west. Others suggest holding out until captured. I listen but do not respond. I have already made my decision. I will not run. I will not be paraded before foreign tribunals like some fallen emperor dragged through the streets. After the meeting, I walk the length of the central corridor. My steps echo too loudly in the confined space. I pass closed doors behind which secretaries work, aides murmur, and others simply sit, waiting. It is strange how still the world becomes when it is about to end. Blondie greets me as I return to my quarters. She wags her tail, oblivious to the tension in the air. I kneel beside her, pressing my forehead to her fur. Her warmth is real, grounding. I stay there a moment longer than usual. She licks my cheek and rests her head on my leg. Eva enters a moment later with 2 cups of tea. She hands me one and sits beside me. We sip quietly. She talks about a dream she had, something about a summer house on the Baltic Sea, blue skies, a garden filled with roses. I listen. I picture the place as she describes it, a painting in my mind. It is beautiful. Unreal, but beautiful. In the afternoon, I dictate more additions to my testament. I revise a section on betrayal. I remove a sentence about the German people's strength. Not because I doubt them, but because it no longer feels appropriate to speak in generalities. They are suffering now, and I must not use their pain as fuel for my mythology. I sign a letter to Speer. I question his loyalty. I wonder if he too has abandoned the vision. So many have. The dream that once felt immovable now feels like a mirage I chased too far into the desert. I speak with the guards again. I ask them if their families are safe. Some answer honestly. Others lower their eyes. One of them tells me his wife was last seen fleeing west with their child. He does not know if she made it. I place a hand on his shoulder and say nothing more. What words could possibly suffice? Dinner is quiet again. Eva, Goebbels and I eat in near silence. He brings his wife and children again. The youngest plays with a small wooden horse at the table. The innocence in her laughter is a piercing contrast to the grim silence of the adults. I wonder what story she believes this place to be. A secret palace? A game? A strange holiday? Later I walk alone through the bunker. I pass the rooms where once plans were drawn, orders given, battles directed. Now they are mostly empty. Desks cleared, maps rolled up. The war room has become a mausoleum of intentions. I stop in front of a mirror in one of the side rooms. I study my face, not with vanity, but with curiosity. The lines are deeper now, the skin dull, the eyes sunken. I raise a hand to the glass, tracing the reflection's edge. This is the man they will write about. This is the face that history will distort and dissect. I wonder how close the truth will come. Back in my quarters, Eva has lit a candle. It flickers on the table, casting soft shadows across the walls. We sit together on the small couch. She leans her head on my shoulder. Neither of us speaks. I think of the mountains, of wind rushing through pine trees, of snow-capped peaks and the solitude of silence. I think of music, of Wagner's crescendos and soft adagios, of the way sound can lift the soul. Even now, the ceiling creaks. Another blast, distant but strong. The bunker shudders. The lights flicker and recover. The world above is coming undone, stone by stone. Tomorrow, I will speak with the inner circle again. But I already know what needs to be said. It is no longer a question of what to do, but when to do it. Day 5, April 27th, 1945. Time folds in on itself. Each hour stretches like wax under heat, its form melting into the next. The bunker breathes with a steady hum. The sound of air filtration, distant conversation, the soft shuffle of boots on concrete. And beyond it all, the war continues. Dull thuds and shattering cracks filter down from above, growing louder with each passing hour. I wake early, if what I do can still be called waking. Sleep is light and fragmented. My dreams have become recurring loops, faces I can no longer name, voices echoing in corridors, wide empty stages before silent crowds. I sit on the edge of the bed, motionless for a long while. Eva stirs behind me, but says nothing. When I finally rise, I wash and dress with the same solemn routine. The water is cool, the basin cracked along one edge. My fingers move slower than they used to, clumsier. I button my collar with difficulty. My reflection looks back at me, a man shrunken by time and regret. My skin is thin, my eyes shadowed, my posture stooped, not by age alone. Breakfast is tasteless. A piece of bread, a smear of margarine, lukewarm coffee. I eat because it is expected. No one comments. Meals are less about sustenance now, and more about the ritual of pretending we are still alive in the way we once were. The meeting begins at 9. The map room smells of sweat and dust. Bormann and Krebs give updates. Their words are clipped, technical, and devoid of hope. The Soviets are pressing further into the city centre. Pockets of resistance are being crushed. Our radio communication is patchy at best. We speak of escape routes again. Some still believe it possible to flee west, to reach the Americans. I listen without responding. The idea feels absurd. There is no escape for me. Even if I wanted to run, where would I go? Who would take me in? The man I am cannot simply disappear. I ask about the civilians. How many remain in the city? No one gives a firm number. Tens of thousands, maybe more. Most hiding in cellars, beneath collapsed buildings, clinging to life. I try to imagine them. Their fear, their hunger. Do they blame me? Or have they moved beyond blame into pure survival? In the corridor afterward, I overhear 2 junior officers talking in hushed tones. One of them wonders aloud what will happen after. The other does not answer. Their voices trail off as they notice me. I do not confront them. They speak only what many are thinking. Back in my quarters, Eva brings tea. She is taken to humming as she works, tuneless but soft, almost soothing. Today she wears a simple grey dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She asks if I will go outside, just for a moment of air in the garden ruins. I decline. The risk is too great now. Even standing at the exit feels like tempting fate. Blondie lies by the radiator. Her ears twitch occasionally at the distant rumble. I crouch beside her and run my fingers through her fur. She nuzzles my palm and closes her eyes. In her simplicity, there is peace. She knows nothing of politics or betrayal. She simply trusts. It is a trust I feel I do not deserve. Later in the day, I meet with the Goebbels family. Joseph is tense but composed. His wife, Magda, speaks of the children with a faint smile, though her eyes are hollow. The children play nearby, unaware. I watch them for a long time. Their laughter is soft, high-pitched, surreal in this place of endings. I wonder how much they understand. How much has been hidden from them? I ask Goebbels what he plans to do. He says, with clarity and conviction, that they will stay, all of them, that they will not live in a world without National Socialism. His words are chilling, though I do not challenge them. I understand the logic, warped though it may be. He seeks to die on his own terms. We all do. In the late afternoon, I walk through the eastern corridor, alone. The bunker is quieter now. Fewer people move through its halls. Some have fled. Others simply stay in their rooms, waiting. Doors are closed. Conversations are whispered. I pause by the door to the communications room. Inside, a young officer sits with headphones on, recording transmissions. He looks up and nods. I nod back. The reports he logs now are more of a dirge than a briefing. Accounts of collapse, one neighbourhood after another, swallowed by the Red Army. I return to my quarters as dusk settles. Though we cannot see the sky, we can feel the day shift. The air grows cooler, and the lights seem dimmer, more golden. Eva has lit a small candle. Its flame dances gently, casting long shadows. We eat a light meal together. Some kind of tinned stew, crackers, weak wine. She talks about her sister, about a trip they once took to Bavaria. I listen, I smile, I ask questions. We pretend, for a short while, that the world still holds places like that. Sunlit fields, cold lakes, forests thick with pine. After dinner, I sit at the desk and write in silence. Not orders, not proclamations, just thoughts, reflections. I write of silence, of the peculiar weight of finality. I do not know if anyone will ever read these pages. Perhaps they will burn like so much else. But still I write. It calms my thoughts. Eva reads nearby, legs tucked beneath her. Blondie sleeps curled in a ball. The room is warm, softly lit. For a moment, the world outside does not exist. Then the ground trembles again. A blast, closer this time. The lights flicker. Dust trickles down like powder from the ceiling corners. Eva does not react, nor do I. We simply wait until the bunker stills again. I blow out the candle and lie in bed, fully dressed. My eyes search the ceiling. I think of the mountain air, of wind and pine, of silence unbroken by war. Tomorrow we will begin to prepare. The end is no longer approaching. It is here. Day 6, April 28th, 1945. The lights flicker more often now. Each time they hesitate, there is a moment where I wonder if they'll return. So far, they always have. But even electricity seems uncertain of its place here, in this world between the living and the dead. The air is heavier today. The bunker smells of sweat, smoke, and resignation. I rise slowly. My body aches in new places, deep in the joints, behind the eyes, in the small of my back. It's as if even my bones are tired of holding me upright. I sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall for a long while before I move. Eva is quiet this morning. She brushes her hair in silence, lips pressed tightly together. We share a look, and there is no need for words. We both feel it, the change in the air, the edge of finality sharpening. I dress without help, buttoning each part of my uniform, slowly, deliberately. Every thread feels symbolic now. These clothes, this ritual, they are not about power anymore, but dignity, a way to maintain some shape as the world collapses. Breakfast is sparse, almost ceremonial. Weak coffee, bread from 2 days ago, a smear of jam. Eva joins me at the table, and we eat slowly, watching each other across the flickering candlelight that now substitutes for proper bulbs. She tries to smile. I do too. Krebs arrives at 8:30. He has news. Bad, of course. There is no other kind. Mussolini is dead, executed by Italian partisans. His body was hung upside down in a public square, photographed, spat upon. The images are spreading already, carried westward by whispers in ink. I say nothing for a long time. When I finally speak, my voice is quiet. That will not be my fate, I tell him. He nods once solemnly. The idea has grown more present in recent days. The how, the when. I have written of it in the Testament, made clear my wishes. But thoughts are one thing, action is another. The mind must prepare the body, and mine is not quite ready. Goebbels joins the meeting. His usual fervour is more subdued today. He has heard the news as well. We do not speak of it further. Instead, we review what little is left of our command. There are no reinforcements, no radio contact with many of our units. The Soviets are closing in on all sides. At 10, I call for my secretaries. I review the Testament again. I change nothing, but I read it slowly, line by line, letting the words settle. There is a gravity in them I can't escape. These are my final declarations. The legacy I hope to shape before silence takes its place. Around noon, I walk the central corridor alone. The guards no longer salute, not from disrespect, but from shared exhaustion. Some lean against walls, one sleeps sitting up. I do not disturb them. Blondie finds me near the generator room. She trots beside me, tail wagging faintly. I kneel, running my hand along her back. Her warmth is soothing, familiar. She has been with me through much. I wonder if she senses what comes next. I return to my quarters to find Eva writing at the desk. She is composing letters, I think. To her family, perhaps? I do not ask. She places one in an envelope and seals it carefully, then smiles at me, as if to say, "It's done." We sit together in silence for a long while. The candle burns low between us. In the afternoon, I summon a few aides. I speak quietly, clearly. I inform them of my intentions. There are no objections, just nods, muted voices, a few tears quickly wiped away. The decision has been made, and now it must be honoured. Goebbels visits again later. He has made his decision as well. He and Magda will remain. The children too. I cannot bring myself to ask how. I already know. He believes in a world that no longer exists. He sees no future for his children in what is to come. His conviction is terrible in its completeness. Dinner is barely a meal. A few preserved vegetables, some wine. Eva lights another candle, its soft light dancing across her face. We speak of Vienna again, of the cafes, the paintings, the music. She tells me she would like to see it once more. I nod. I tell her that perhaps, in another life, we could. Afterward we change clothes. She chooses a dress I have seen only once before. A pale blue gown, elegant but modest. I wear a simple jacket, dark trousers. We look like a couple preparing for a quiet evening, not for the end of all things. We talk late into the evening. We laugh once or twice, softly. It feels good to laugh, human. There is no anger between us, no fear, only a quiet, shared understanding. That this moment, this final togetherness, is ours to claim. As the candle gutters, I stand and cross the room. I check the drawer where I've kept the means. It is still there, untouched exactly as I left it. I close it gently. We lie in bed, fully clothed. Her head rests on my shoulder. I listen to her breathing, steady and calm. Blondie curls at our feet. The lights dim further, straining to hold on. Somewhere above, the city is still fighting, but down here it is already over. Tomorrow we take the final step, not out of despair, but out of resolution. The curtain will fall, and we will not wait for someone else to close it. Day 7, April 29th, 1945. There is a strange peace to this morning, a stillness that stretches across the corridors like mist. The bunker is quieter than usual, quieter than it has ever been. The air feels thicker, not from dust or smoke, but from anticipation. We are no longer counting days, we are counting hours. I wake before the lights hum to life. The darkness is gentle, embracing. Eva sleeps beside me, her breath even, her body curled toward mine. For a moment, I let myself pretend that we're simply a couple waking to a normal day, that the sounds above are not the collapse of a city, but distant thunder, that the bunker is a retreat, not a tomb. But the illusion fades quickly, and I rise. I wash slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I hold the razor. The mirror reflects a man both diminished and determined. There are shadows beneath my eyes, lines deeper than before. I finish dressing without assistance. The uniform still fits, though more loosely than it once did. I smooth it carefully, brushing away flecks of dust. Blondie greets me as I step into the hallway. She wags her tail once, then sits beside the door. Her eyes are steady, calm. I kneel to stroke her head, my fingers lingering in her fur. She has been with me through everything. She has never asked for answers. Breakfast is silent. Eva prepares the table with care. A pot of tea, a few biscuits. The bread is stale but warm. She sits across from me, her expression unreadable. We eat slowly, savouring what we can. Neither of us speaks of what is to come. There is no need. Shortly after, I meet with Krebs and Bergdorf. They bring updates, though little has changed. The Soviets are within blocks. Their artillery fire now lands just meters from the bunker entrance. The city is unrecognisable, choked with rubble, fire, screams. They tell me that the Americans have heard our signals, but no help is coming. I nod. There is no anger, no surprise, only confirmation. We discuss the final logistics. I sign a few documents, amendments to my testament, clarifications about property, instructions for the remaining staff. I ask for witnesses. I want it official. There is dignity in documentation. Goebbels arrives with Magda. They are resolute. He stands tall, his voice calm. He has made arrangements. Their children are playing in a nearby room. He does not say it, but I know what he plans. Magda cannot bear the thought of her children living in a world without our vision. I do not argue. We have each made our decisions. Around midday, I take a final walk through the bunker. I visit each room slowly, deliberately. I nod to the staff. I thank them. Some try to speak but falter. Others offer quiet goodbyes. The silence is heavy, but not cold. We're all sharing something too large for words. I stop by the kitchen. The cook hands me a cup of warm broth. I sip it. It tastes of memory, of earlier winters, of days when things still felt possible. Eva is waiting for me in our quarters. She's dressed in a soft cream blouse and skirt. Her hair is pinned back. She looks calm, more calm than I feel. We sit together, hand in hand, for a long time. There is nothing left to plan. At 4 p.m, I call for our aides. I ask them to prepare the room. 2 small pistols, a vial of cyanide, everything placed exactly as requested. They nod, eyes wet but composed. I kneel beside Blondie once more. I whisper softly into her ear. She wags her tail. One of the aides steps forward, syringe in hand. I look away. A small whimper, then silence. My hand remains on her head until it grows still. I do not cry. I feel hollow. Eva stands beside me. We do not speak. We simply embrace. There is a softness to her that I have always found remarkable. Even now, she chooses love, not fear, not blame. The aides withdraw. The door closes gently. Inside the room, we sit on the couch. The light is dim, the air still. I hold Ava's hand tightly. She looks into my eyes, not searching for answers, but sharing understanding. She takes the capsule first, placing it on her tongue. I watch her swallow. Her breathing slows. She leans into me. I take my pistol in hand. The weight is familiar. My other hand still clutches hers. I close my eyes and then silence. Not a silence of dread or regret, but a silence that accepts. A silence that ends. What happened next? Reflections. Part 1. The Fall of Berlin. By late April 1945, Berlin, once the heart of Hitler's empire, was no longer a city. It was a shell. The streets were lined with rubble, the buildings broken open like wounds, and the air heavy with smoke and the constant thunder of artillery. For nearly 2 weeks, the Soviet Red Army had been encircling the capital, tightening its grip with brutal efficiency. The city's defenders, a desperate mix of regular soldiers, SS troops, old men from the Volkssturm, and even young boys from the Hitler Youth, fought without coordination or hope. Inside the ruined city, chaos reigned. Food was scarce, medical supplies had all but vanished. Civilians huddled in basements, listening to the shelling above, unsure if they would survive another hour. Water was drawn from bomb craters. Bodies lay in the streets, too dangerous to retrieve. The once proud city had become a place of ash and agony. The Soviet assault began in earnest on April 16th with the Battle of the Silo Heights. Marshal Zhukov's first Belarusian front faced stubborn German resistance, but sheer numbers and firepower eventually overwhelmed the defenders. As Soviet troops pushed closer to the city, the fighting grew more brutal. Street by street, building by building, the Red Army advanced. Flamethrowers, tanks, grenades, nothing was spared in the fight to seize the capital. By April 25th, Berlin was completely encircled. There would be no relief force, no breakout. For the soldiers and civilians inside, it was clear that the end had come. In the days that followed, Soviet soldiers reached the outskirts of the government district. Fierce fighting erupted around the Reichstag, the German parliament building, a potent symbol for both the attackers and defenders. German snipers were stationed in the ruins, and some of the bloodiest fighting of the war occurred in the shadows of its shattered columns. Meanwhile, inside the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler refused to leave. Even as Soviet shells shook the ground above, he issued orders to divisions that no longer existed, moved imaginary armies on maps, and dismissed any suggestion of surrender. His closest followers, including Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda, stayed with him. Others fled or took their own lives. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler shot himself in the head. Eva Braun, his wife of just one day, took cyanide. Their bodies were burned in the garden of the Reich Chancellery by loyal staff. Hitler's death marked the symbolic collapse of the Nazi regime, though the fighting continued for days afterward. When Soviet soldiers finally stormed the Reich Chancellery, they found ruins. The walls were scorched, the garden blackened. In the bunker below, they discovered a scene of eerie quiet. Half-eaten meals, abandoned papers, the last remnants of a government that no longer existed. It was here, in the bowels of Berlin, that the war in Europe began to draw its final breath. The Red Army suffered staggering losses. In the Battle of Berlin alone, more than 80,000 Soviet soldiers were killed, with over 275,000 wounded. German casualties, military and civilian, were immense, though difficult to fully quantify. Tens of thousands of civilians died in the bombardment, or were caught in the crossfire. Soviet troops, having endured immense suffering and loss during the war, unleashed their fury on Berlin. There were widespread reports of looting, violence, and atrocities, including the mass rape of German women. The scars of the battle would remain for decades, etched into both the landscape and the psyche of a broken nation. On May 2nd, Berlin formally surrendered to Soviet forces. General Helmuth Weidling, the commander of the city's defences, issued the order. German resistance ceased, and Red Army soldiers hoisted the Soviet flag over the Reichstag, a moment immortalised in one of the most iconic photographs of the war. The city was left in ruins. Nearly a third of its buildings were destroyed. Infrastructure was in shambles. Electricity, sewage and water systems were all but gone. The survivors emerged from basements to find a world unrecognisable. Berlin had been the heart of a twisted empire, but now it stood as a symbol of its downfall. In the days and weeks that followed, Soviet authorities took control of the city. Berlin would become a central stage in the Cold War, but in those immediate days after the battle, it was simply a place of ghosts and grief. The fall of Berlin marked the final major battle in the European theatre. It was not only the physical defeat of Nazi Germany, but a psychological collapse as well. For the Allies, it was the final act in a long, bloody war. For the Germans, it was the end of a nightmare and the beginning of reckoning. As May began, the guns began to fall silent. The war was not yet over, but Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen, and the world was beginning to breathe again. Part 2. Germany's Surrender. After Berlin fell and Adolf Hitler took his own life, the Third Reich entered its final death throes. But the war was not yet officially over. The German military machine still held pockets of territory across Europe, and some commanders continued fighting even as their world collapsed around them. In this fragile twilight between Hitler's death and Germany's unconditional surrender, chaos and uncertainty reigned. The man who succeeded Hitler, according to his final political testament, was Admiral Karl Dönitz. From his command post in Flensburg, near the Danish border, Dönitz assumed the title of Reich President. His aim was singular: to end the war while preserving as much of Germany as possible from Soviet control. Dönitz attempted to negotiate a partial surrender to the Western Allies, specifically the British and Americans, while continuing to resist the Soviets. He hoped to save German civilians and soldiers from falling into Soviet hands, fearing harsh retribution. But the Allies had agreed long before that only a total, unconditional surrender on all fronts would be accepted. Meanwhile, the remnants of the German army were disintegrating. In Italy, German forces surrendered to the Allies on May 2nd, 1945. In northern Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, German commanders capitulated on May 4th. General Bernard Montgomery received their formal surrender at Lüneburg Heath, and from that point on, British and American forces saw resistance collapse rapidly. Still, the full German surrender had not yet been achieved. In the days after Hitler's death, German forces continued to fight in some areas, often without coordination or even knowledge of the Führer's suicide. In Prague, fierce fighting between Czech resistance fighters and German troops continued until May 8th. On the Eastern Front, Soviet troops pressed further west, eager to crush any remaining opposition. By May 6th, the writing was on the wall. The German High Command could no longer ignore the inevitable. Dönitz and his government agreed to dispatch General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff of the German Armed Forces High Command, to the Allied headquarters in Reims, France. There, in a schoolhouse repurposed as the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, the end came swiftly. On May 7, 1945, at 2:41 a.m., General Jodl signed the Act of Military Surrender. The document stated that all German forces would cease hostilities at 23:01 Central European Time on May 8th. The signatories included General Walter Bedell Smith for the Allies and General Ivan Susloparov for the Soviet Union. However, Stalin was not satisfied with this arrangement. He demanded a second, more formal surrender ceremony to take place in Berlin, specifically in the Soviet-controlled district of Karlshorst. So, on the evening of May 8th, in a dimly lit room crowded with military brass and translators, the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany was signed a second time. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, representing the German High Command, stood before Marshal Georgy Zhukov and other Allied officers and affixed his signature to the surrender document. At last, after nearly 6 years of war in Europe, the guns fell silent. In the United Kingdom, May 8th became known as Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. Across Britain, celebrations erupted. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. King George VI addressed the nation. Prime Minister Winston Churchill appeared on a balcony to raucous cheers, declaring, "This is your victory." The mood was jubilant, though tempered by the losses endured. In the United States, the news arrived in the morning hours. President Harry S. Truman, who had only recently taken office following the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, dedicated the victory to his predecessor's memory. Americans danced in the streets, wept with relief, and embraced strangers. Church bells rang, flags waved. But amid the joy was the sobering truth. The war in the Pacific was still raging. In the Soviet Union, the surrender took effect on May 9th, due to the time difference. That date remains Russia's Victory Day. Marked with military parades and solemn remembrance, the Soviet people had suffered more than any other nation during the war. Over 20 million dead, countless cities destroyed. Their triumph came at immense cost. But for Germany, there was no celebration. The country lay in ruins. Cities had been bombed into rubble. Infrastructure had collapsed. Millions were displaced, starving or dead. The once mighty Wehrmacht was disarmed. The Nazi regime, which had promised a 1,000-year empire, had lasted just 12, and now its architects were either dead, in hiding, or awaiting capture. Dönitz's Flensburg government lasted only briefly. On May 23rd, Allied forces arrested Dönitz and his cabinet, dissolving what remained of the Nazi state. Germany was placed under Allied military occupation. The country was divided into 4 zones, each controlled by one of the major Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France. The German people emerged from the rubble into a strange new world. The swastikas were torn down. Propaganda was stripped from the walls. Streets and schools were renamed. A process known as denazification began, aimed at purging Nazi ideology from every corner of society. There was no single moment of peace for survivors, for soldiers returning from war. For widows and orphans, the road ahead was long and uncertain. But the surrender of Nazi Germany on May 8th, 1945, marked the end of one of the darkest chapters in human history. It also marked the beginning of something else, a chance, however fragile, to rebuild. In the ashes of defeat, Germany would begin a slow and painful transformation, from dictatorship to democracy, from division to unity. But in that moment, as the ink dried on the surrender documents and the war officially ended, there was only one emotion that mattered. Relief. The guns had stopped. The war in Europe was over. Part 3. The end of the Third Reich. With the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany in May 1945, the Third Reich ceased to exist. It did not go out in a single dramatic moment, but in layers, military, political, ideological, each unraveling in the wake of defeat. The regime that had once ruled over vast swathes of Europe, commanded armies, and committed unfathomable atrocities was now a memory, its remnants scattered across a continent in ruins. The administrative structure of the Nazi state, already weakened by the collapse of communication and the suicide of Adolf Hitler, evaporated within days. The so-called Flensburg government, established by Admiral Karl Dönitz after Hitler's death, was little more than a symbolic holdover. It claimed to represent continuity, but in reality it was powerless. The Allies, having no interest in preserving any part of the Nazi regime, dissolved the Flensburg government on May 23, 1945. Its members were arrested, and Germany became an occupied territory. Germany was divided into 4 zones of occupation, each controlled by one of the major Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France. Berlin, though located deep within the Soviet zone, was similarly divided into 4 sectors. This division was meant to be temporary, an administrative necessity until a permanent political solution could be agreed upon. Yet it would lay the groundwork for decades of Cold War division. Each occupying power established a military government tasked with restoring order, rebuilding infrastructure, and most crucially, denazification, the process of removing Nazi ideology, influence, and personnel from all aspects of German life. It was a monumental task. The Nazi Party had infiltrated every institution: schools, courts, police, businesses, even churches. The swastika had become as ubiquitous as the German language itself. The Allies approached denazification in different ways. The Americans and British began by removing known Nazis from positions of power and conducting investigations into individuals' involvement in the regime. Questionnaires were issued to millions of Germans, asking about political affiliations, roles in Nazi organizations, and wartime activities. Those deemed complicit were barred from holding public office, and in some cases, tried in courts. The Soviets, meanwhile, conducted a more forceful purge. They arrested large numbers of suspected Nazis, as well as political opponents, and sent many to labour camps. They also took a strong role in rewriting the historical narrative, framing Soviet victory as liberation and portraying themselves as the great anti-fascist force. In addition to denazification, the Allies faced the challenge of dismantling the vast machinery that had supported Hitler's rule. This included disbanding the Wehrmacht, dissolving the Gestapo and SS, and removing Nazi propaganda from public spaces. Monuments were torn down, party buildings were repurposed or destroyed. Hitler's image, once omnipresent, was outlawed. Even more daunting was the human cost. Germany was a nation of refugees, widows, orphans, and survivors. Cities had been flattened by Allied bombing. Transportation networks were in shambles. Food was scarce, and disease was widespread. In some regions, particularly the East, mass displacement occurred as millions of ethnic Germans were expelled from former territories and forced to resettle in what remained of Germany's borders. The occupying powers also discovered the full scale of the Holocaust. Though rumours and reports had circulated during the war, the liberation of concentration camps like Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, and Dachau brought the horror into focus. Emaciated survivors, gas chambers, piles of corpses. These were not wartime rumours, but atrocities beyond comprehension. For many Germans, it was the first undeniable confrontation with what had been done in their name. This revelation shattered illusions. The myth that ordinary citizens had been unaware of the regime's crimes became harder to maintain. Though many still claimed ignorance or insisted they had simply followed orders, the truth was visible in the ashes of the camps, in the ledgers of train schedules, in the testimonies of those who lived through it. The international community responded by laying the groundwork for justice. Plans were made for trials, not only of the most prominent Nazi leaders, but also of collaborators and perpetrators at every level. This legal process would culminate in the Nuremberg trials, which began in late 1945. The end of the Third Reich also brought a crisis of identity. For over a decade, the Nazi regime had presented itself as the embodiment of German destiny. It had redefined patriotism as allegiance to a single man, a single party. Now, with that man dead and his regime dismantled, many Germans were left directionless. The process of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coming to terms with the past, would take decades. Initially, many Germans focused on their own suffering, the bombings, the loss of loved ones, the hardships of occupation. It took time, education, and generational change for a broader reckoning with guilt and responsibility to take hold. Yet amid the ruins, seeds of renewal were planted. Schools reopened, staffed with teachers deemed politically neutral. Newspapers returned, no longer controlled by propaganda offices. Local governments were gradually restored under Allied supervision, and slowly, civil society began to re-emerge. In the West, this reconstruction would eventually lead to the formation of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. In the East, under Soviet influence, the German Democratic Republic would rise. Both claimed to be the legitimate heir of the German people, yet each carried a different vision of what Germany should become. But in those first months after the surrender, there was only uncertainty. The Third Reich had been defeated, but the shadow it cast was long and dark. The physical symbols were gone, but the psychological scars remained. The ideology had been outlawed, but its poison lingered in whispers, in memories, in denial. The world had witnessed a regime built on hatred, violence, and absolute control. Its downfall had come at a staggering cost: tens of millions dead, continents in ruins, generations traumatized. And yet, from the ashes of that collapse, a new chapter was beginning. The end of the Third Reich was not just the end of a regime, it was the end of a delusion, a terrible dream from which the world was finally waking. And as the rubble was cleared and the dead were mourned, the question echoed: how had it happened? And how could it be prevented from ever happening again? Part 4. The Fate of the Inner Circle. When the Third Reich collapsed in May 1945, the men and women who had formed Adolf Hitler's inner circle faced a reckoning. Some took their own lives, following their Führer into death. Others fled, hoping to disappear into the chaos of a ruined continent. A few were captured and brought to justice. Their fates were as varied as their personalities, but together they reflected the final dissolution of a regime built on fear, loyalty, and unrelenting violence. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, was among the most devoted. He had remained in the Führerbunker with Hitler until the very end, believing it was his duty to die with the regime he had helped shape. On May 1, 1945, one day after Hitler's suicide, Goebbels and his wife, Magda, murdered their 6 children using cyanide. That evening, they emerged into the courtyard above the bunker. Accounts differ on the exact method, but it is widely believed that Magda took cyanide while others in Hitler's immediate staff met similar fates. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and a central figure in the party hierarchy, was last seen fleeing the chancellery as Soviet troops stormed the area. For decades his fate was unknown. He was tried in absentia at Nuremberg and sentenced to death, but in 1972 human remains discovered in West Berlin were confirmed to be his through forensic examination. It is believed Bormann died by suicide, either cyanide or through accidental injury. Hermann Göring, once head of the Luftwaffe and designated successor to Hitler before falling out of favour, was captured by American forces in Bavaria. He had attempted to negotiate a transfer of power in the final days, prompting Hitler to denounce him as a traitor. At the Nuremberg trials, Göring was one of the most prominent defendants. He defended himself vigorously, attempting to justify the regime's actions. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. However, the night before his scheduled exec, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and chief architect of the Holocaust, fled Berlin in disguise, hoping to negotiate with the Western Allies. He was captured by British troops near Bremerförde in late May 1945. While in custody, he bit down on a hidden cyanide capsule during a medical examination and died shortly afterward. The man who had orchestrated so much terror ended his life in a small British outpost, unrecognised until the last moment. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister and close advisor, claimed to have distanced himself from the regime's most brutal aspects. He surrendered to American forces and was tried at Nuremberg, where he accepted a degree of responsibility and expressed remorse. Unlike many others, he was not sentenced to death. Instead, he received 20 years in prison and served his full term in Spandau prison. After his release, Speer became an author, publishing memoirs that offered a rare insider's view into Hitler. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's former deputy, who had bizarrely flown to Scotland in 1941 in an attempt to negotiate peace with Britain, had been imprisoned by the British for the remainder of the war. He was tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to life imprisonment. He would serve that sentence alone for decades, becoming the sole inmate of Spandau prison after others were released or died. In 1987, he was found dead in the prison garden, apparently by suicide, though the circumstances remained controversial. Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl, top military commanders, were both tried at Nuremberg. They had signed numerous orders that violated international law, including those allowing the execution of prisoners of war and civilians. Both were found guilty and hanged in 1946. Many others in the Nazi elite met varied ends. Some were executed after local trials. Others evaded capture for years. Adolf Eichmann, a key planner of the Holocaust, fled to Argentina using false documents. He lived in hiding for over a decade until Israeli agents captured him in 1960. He was tried in Jerusalem, found guilty of crimes against humanity, and executed in 1962. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, also escaped to South America. He lived under protection in Bolivia for years before being extradited to France in 1983. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1991. Josef Mengele, the infamous doctor of Auschwitz, evaded capture entirely. He lived in Brazil and Paraguay under false names, constantly on the move. He died in 1979, reportedly by drowning after a stroke. His identity was only confirmed years later. Not all members of the inner circle met justice. Some died in battle, others disappeared into obscurity, protected by networks of sympathizers or chaos in post-war Europe. Yet their legacies lingered, studied, denounced, feared. In post-war Germany, there was little appetite to remember these figures with anything but horror. Public monuments were not erected in their name. Their writings were banned. Schools taught of their crimes. And over time, their names became warnings, symbols of how power, ideology, and obedience can lead to catastrophe. The Allies, particularly during the Nuremberg trials, sought not only to punish these individuals, but to establish a record, to document the crimes, expose the machinery behind genocide, and create a legal precedent for future generations. The trials marked the first time that heads of state and military commanders were held personally accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The disintegration of Hitler's inner circle also left a psychological scar. Many Germans who had once idolized these men had to confront their roles in the horror. Denial, guilt, and shame rippled through the population. In the early years, many tried to forget. But with time, documentaries, books, and court proceedings made forgetting impossible. As new generations came of age in post-war Germany, there was a shift. Universities debated complicity. Artists confronted the past. Memorials rose from the ruins. Names like Himmler, Göring, and Goebbels ceased to be symbols of authority. They became cautionary tales. In the end, the fate of Hitler's inner circle was varied, but none escaped history. Whether by suicide, execution, imprisonment, or disgrace, their stories ended in collapse. Their visions died with them, and in that death the world was left not only with justice, but with a lesson that loyalty to power, unmoored from morality, leads inevitably to ruin. Part 5. The Nuremberg Trials. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the world faced an unprecedented question: how to bring to justice those responsible for the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. Never before had leaders of a defeated state been held accountable for crimes against humanity in an international court. The solution became one of the most significant legal milestones of the 20th century: the Nuremberg Trials. The idea of holding Nazi leaders legally responsible began during the war itself. In 1943, the Allies issued the Moscow Declaration, pledging that those responsible for war crimes would be punished. As the war ended and the full extent of the Holocaust and other Nazi atrocities came to light, the need for justice became undeniable. The trials were named after the city of Nuremberg, chosen for both symbolic and practical reasons. Once a centre of Nazi propaganda rallies, Nuremberg now stood as a place of reckoning. The city had a relatively intact courthouse and prison, and it was located in the American occupation zone, making it logistically feasible for the Allies. The main trial, known as the International Military Tribunal, IMT, began on November 20th, 1945. It was conducted by representatives of the four Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France. The courtroom was located in the Palace of Justice, and the proceedings were translated into multiple languages, an innovation at the time. 24 high-ranking Nazi officials were indicted on charges that included 1. Crimes against peace, planning and waging wars of aggression. 2. War crimes, violations of the laws or customs of war. 3. Crimes against humanity, murder, extermination, enslavement, and other inhumane acts against civilians. 4th, conspiracy to commit these crimes. Among the accused were prominent figures such as Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop, former foreign minister, and Wilhelm Keitel, head of the German Armed Forces High Command. Martin Bormann was tried in absentia, believed at the time to be in hiding. The prosecution assembled a massive body of evidence: documents, photographs, eyewitness accounts, and even film footage. Unlike previous forms of victor's justice, the Nuremberg trials aimed to build a comprehensive, legal, and impartial case. The horrors of the Holocaust were laid bare. Eyewitnesses described gas chambers. Camp commandants testified. Liberated prisoners spoke of starvation, forced labor, and mass executions. The defense mounted several arguments. Some claimed they were simply following orders. Others insisted that the tribunal lacked jurisdiction. A few tried to shift blame or deny knowledge of the crimes. The defense of just obeying orders, later known as the Nuremberg defense, was rejected by the court. The tribunal held that individuals had a moral responsibility to resist unlawful commands. The trials marked the first time that crimes against humanity were prosecuted in an international forum. This concept, though present in earlier legal thought, had never been applied so broadly. It meant that even actions taken within a sovereign state, such as genocide against a country's own citizens, could be punished under international law. Verdicts were delivered on October 1st, 1946. 12 of the defendants were sentenced to death by hanging, including Göring, Ribbentrop, and Keitel. 3 were acquitted, and the rest received prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life. Göring famously cheated the hangman by taking cyanide the night before his execution. The executions took place on October 16, 1946, in the prison gymnasium. The bodies were cremated and their ashes scattered to prevent the creation of memorials. Beyond the main trial, the Americans conducted a series of subsequent Nuremberg trials, targeting other sectors of Nazi leadership. These included doctors who had performed inhumane experiments on prisoners, industrialists who had profited from forced labour, judges who enforced Nazi racial laws, and SS officers who led the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units. The doctors' trial, held from 1946 to 1947, revealed the extent of medical crimes committed under the guise of science. Experiments included freezing subjects to death, testing poisons, and infecting wounds with bacteria. The trial resulted in the conviction of 16 doctors and led to the establishment of the Nuremberg Code, a set of ethical principles for human experimentation that remains influential in medical ethics to this day. The judges' trial targeted members of the Nazi judicial system who had sentenced thousands to death under racially motivated laws. The message was clear: the law must serve justice, not tyranny. The industrialist trials examined the role of major corporations like RG Farben, Krupp, and Flick, which had used slave labour and supported the Nazi war effort. Executives were convicted, though many served short sentences or were released early, reflecting Cold War political considerations. The Nuremberg trials established foundational principles of modern international law. They affirmed that individuals, not just states, can be held accountable for crimes. Following orders is not a sufficient defense for committing atrocities. Heads of state are not immune from prosecution. Crimes against humanity are punishable under international law. These principles laid the groundwork for future tribunals, such as those for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, and ultimately for the establishment of the International Criminal Court, ICC, in 2002. The trials were not without criticism. Some viewed them as victor's justice, noting that Allied actions, like the bombing of Dresden or the Soviet invasion of Poland, were not subject to similar scrutiny. Others questioned the impartiality of the Soviet judges, especially given the USSR's own record of human rights abuses. Yet despite these criticisms, the Nuremberg trials remain a landmark moment in the history of justice. They offered a legal response to unimaginable evil and created a model for how the international community could respond to mass atrocity. Perhaps more than anything, the trials served as a mirror, forcing the world to confront what had happened and why. The footage, testimonies, and documents left behind have been studied by generations. They stand not only as evidence but as a warning. Justice, though imperfect, was attempted, and in that attempt, humanity took a step toward accountability, toward a world where even the most powerful must answer for their crimes. Nuremberg was not the end of evil, but it was a beginning for something else, the idea that law, even in the face of horror, could speak. Part 6. Germany divided. The fall of the Third Reich left Germany not only defeated, but directionless. The Nazi regime had collapsed with no legitimate successor, and in its wake, the country was carved up by the victors of the Second World War. What followed was the partition of a nation and the onset of a new geopolitical era, the Cold War. Germany, once the instigator of a global conflict, now became its central battlefield. The division of Germany had been discussed before the war even ended. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, Allied leaders, Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin, agreed that post-war Germany would be occupied and administered by the four major Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France. This occupation was intended as a temporary measure, designed to disarm and democratize Germany before allowing it to govern itself again. The country was divided into 4 occupation zones, each controlled by one of the Allies. Berlin, although located deep within the Soviet zone, was also split into 4 sectors. The idea was that cooperation among the Allies would guide Germany back to stability. But cooperation soon gave way to suspicion. The underlying political ideologies of the occupying powers could not have been more different. The Western Allies, especially the United States and Britain, favoured liberal democracy and free market economics. The Soviet Union, in contrast, sought to expand its influence through communism and central control. These competing visions would shape the fate of Germany for the next half-century. In the immediate post-war years, the zones were governed independently, each power set about rebuilding infrastructure, restoring basic services, and purging remnants of the Nazi regime. But as the focus shifted from denazification to reconstruction, tensions emerged. The Western zones received significant financial aid from the United States under the Marshall Plan, launched in 1947. This program aimed to rebuild European economies and prevent the spread of communism. West Germany, as the combined American, British, and later French zones came to be known, benefited immensely. Industry was revived, cities rebuilt, and economic stability began to return. The Soviet zone, by contrast, experienced a very different recovery. The USSR, having borne immense suffering during the war, demanded reparations from Germany. Factories were dismantled and shipped east. Agricultural reforms were imposed. Political opposition was silenced. The Soviets began moulding their zone into a socialist state aligned with Moscow's interests. The first major crisis of this division came in 1948, when the Western Allies introduced a new currency, the Deutsche Mark, in their zones. This move, aimed at stabilizing the economy, was done without Soviet agreement. In response, the Soviets blockaded West Berlin, cutting off all road, rail, and canal access to the city. The West answered with the Berlin airlift. For nearly a year, British and American aircraft flew over 270,000 missions, delivering food, fuel, and supplies to the citizens of West Berlin. At its peak, a plane landed every 30 seconds. The airlift became a symbol of Western resolve and humanitarian effort. In May 1949, the Soviets lifted the blockade, having failed to force the West out of Berlin. That same year, 2 German states were born. On May 23, 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany, FRG, was established in the Western zones. With its capital in Bonn, the FRG adopted a democratic constitution, elected a parliament, and began building a new identity rooted in Western values and economic cooperation. On October 7, 1949, the Soviet zone became the German Democratic Republic, GDR, a socialist state ruled by the Socialist Unity Party. Its capital was East Berlin, and while it bore the trappings of a republic, real power lay in the hands of party officials loyal to Moscow. Thus, Germany was split, not just physically, but ideologically. East and West Germany became rival nations, each claiming to represent the true German people. Families were divided. Former neighbours lived under radically different systems. Travel between the two states became increasingly restricted. The division was most visible in Berlin. Though the city had been divided since 1945, the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 turned a political divide into a literal one. The wall was built by the GDR to stop East Germans from fleeing to the west. Over the years, it became a stark symbol of repression. Guard towers, barbed wire, and minefields lined the border. Dozens died trying to escape, yet despite this division, life in the two Germanys evolved in parallel. West Germany experienced rapid growth, becoming one of the world's leading economies. It joined NATO in 1955 and the European Economic Community in 1957. Democracy took root. A culture of remembrance and responsibility emerged, confronting the Nazi past. East Germany, meanwhile, aligned itself with the Soviet bloc. It joined the Warsaw Pact and adopted a planned economy. Surveillance was widespread, especially under the Stasi, the state security service. Dissent was stifled. While the government provided housing, healthcare, and education, shortages and censorship were common. The Cold War rivalry between East and West played out in many forms: sports, culture, espionage, but nowhere more visibly than in Germany. The wall divided not only a city, but the world's superpowers. When US President John F. Kennedy visited West Berlin in 1963 and declared "Ich bin ein Berliner," he was affirming the West's commitment to freedom in the face of tyranny. Despite the tension, the two Germanys found ways to coexist. In the 1970s, a policy of détente known as Ostpolitik sought to normalize relations. West German Chancellor Willy Brandt led efforts to recognize East Germany and improve cooperation. This thaw allowed for limited family visits and cultural exchange. Yet the divide remained. It would take decades and seismic shifts in global politics for reunification to become possible. In the late 1980s, cracks appeared in the Eastern Bloc. Economic stagnation, public unrest, and the reformist policies of Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev weakened communist control. In 1989, a wave of revolutions swept across Eastern Europe. On November 9, 1989, East Germany opened its borders. The Berlin Wall fell, not with an explosion, but with cheers and hammers. People from both sides climbed the wall, embraced, and began dismantling it by hand. It was a moment of jubilation, catharsis, and hope. Less than a year later, on October 3, 1990, Germany was officially reunified. The division was over, but the legacy remained. Decades of separation had shaped two different societies. Reunification was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new chapter. Germany's division was born of defeat, forged in rivalry, and healed through courage and persistence. It stands today as a reminder of how war can fracture a nation and how peace, though slow, can mend it. Part 7. Legacy and Memory. The death of Adolf Hitler and the fall of the Nazi regime in 1945 brought an end to one of the most devastating chapters in human history. But the legacy of that period, the war, the Holocaust, the ideology of hate, did not vanish with the final gunfire. It lingered, woven into the consciousness of a shattered Germany and a world struggling to comprehend what had occurred. In the decades that followed, the task of remembering, understanding, and learning from the horrors of the Nazi era became as in Germany, the immediate aftermath of the war was marked by denial, silence, and selective memory. Many Germans focused on their own suffering, the bombings, the loss of loved ones, the deprivations of the post-war years. The crimes of the Nazi regime were acknowledged, but often at a distance. People claimed ignorance or insisted they had no choice but to comply. It wasn't until the 1960s that a true cultural reckoning began. The Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, which prosecuted former camp personnel, brought the Holocaust into German courtrooms and newspapers. Younger generations began to ask difficult questions of their parents and grandparents. Students protested the continued presence of former Nazis in government and academia. The silence was breaking. In time, Germany became one of the leading nations in confronting its past. Memorials were erected. School curricula were revised to include comprehensive education on the Holocaust and the Nazi period. Museums and documentation centres were established to preserve the memory of victims and examine the mechanisms of fascism. Perhaps the most powerful expression of this commitment to remembrance is the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin. Opened in 2005, it consists of 2,711 concrete slabs of varying heights arranged in a grid. Walking through it, one feels a sense of disorientation and unease, a physical metaphor for loss and absence. Other memorials exist throughout the country. Stolperstein, or stumbling stones, are small brass plaques embedded in sidewalks outside the former homes of Holocaust victims. Each bears a name, date of birth, and fate. There are now over 75,000 Stolperstein across Europe, making it the world's largest decentralized memorial. Germany's process of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coming to terms with the past, has not been perfect, but it is widely regarded as a model of national introspection. Laws were enacted to ban Nazi symbols and Holocaust denial. Neo-Nazi groups are monitored and prosecuted. Political rhetoric that echoes fascist ideologies is met with public backlash and legal scrutiny. Internationally, the legacy of Hitler and the Nazi era has had a profound impact on the development of human rights, international law, and global politics. The horrors of the Holocaust led to the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and the Genocide Convention. The phrase, "never again," became both a moral imperative and a rallying cry for future generations. The Nuremberg trials set a precedent for holding leaders accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This legacy lives on in institutions like the International Criminal Court and in tribunals for Rwanda, Yugoslavia, and beyond. The world learned that justice, though delayed, could be pursued across borders and time. The memory of the Nazi era has also shaped global culture. Films, novels, documentaries, and art continue to explore the causes, consequences, and moral questions of that time. Works like Schindler's List, The Diary of Anne Frank, and Night by Elie Wiesel have become central texts in understanding the human cost of hatred and indifference. At the same time, the legacy is not without danger. In recent years, resurgences of far-right extremism, conspiracy theories, and anti-Semitism have reminded the world that history can echo. Some individuals and groups seek to distort or deny the facts of the Holocaust. Others attempt to rehabilitate fascist symbols and rhetoric under new guises. Germany and much of Europe has responded with vigilance. Education remains central. Survivors continue to speak to students and communities, even as their numbers dwindle. Digitization efforts preserve testimonies for future generations. Museums adapt to new media and audiences. But memory is not static. As the events of the Second World War recede further into the past, the challenge becomes one of relevance. How do societies keep history alive when the last witnesses are gone? How do we ensure that remembrance does not become ritual, but remains meaningful? One approach is personalization. Instead of focusing solely on dates and numbers, educators and memorials emphasize individual stories, names, faces, diaries, letters. In doing so, they make the abstract tangible. They remind us that behind every statistic is a person, a child, a teacher, a neighbor, a life. Another approach is connection. Drawing parallels between past injustices and present struggles, without equating them, helps young people see the relevance of historical memory. Discrimination, authoritarianism, and propaganda remain present dangers. Understanding their historical roots empowers resistance. The legacy of Hitler is also felt geopolitically. The formation of the European Union was in part a response to the continent's bloody history. Economic and political integration were seen as safeguards against future war. NATO, too, was born from the lessons of the 20th century. These institutions carry within them the memory of a time when the world nearly destroyed itself. In Israel, the memory of the Holocaust is central to national identity. Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, documents the names of victims and educates millions. Holocaust Remembrance Day is observed with moments of silence across the country. Sirens sound, and people stop what they're doing, on roads, in offices, in schools, to stand in reflection. The global Jewish community, scattered by the horrors of the Holocaust, has become a guardian of remembrance. Museums, educational foundations, and survivor networks work tirelessly to keep the truth alive. At the same time, they advocate for a future free from persecution. Hitler's legacy is one of destruction, but also of determination. Determination by the survivors to speak, by nations to remember, and by humanity to learn. The memory of his regime is not one of admiration, but of warning. A monument not in stone, but in conscience. A lesson etched not only in textbooks, but in the resolve of those who say, "Never again," and mean it. We remember not to dwell in the darkness, but to keep the light alive. To know the signs, to name the dangers, to act with courage when it matters most. The bunker where Hitler died is gone, buried beneath concrete. There is no shrine, no marker, no flowers, just earth and silence. But in classrooms, in museums, in stories passed from one generation to the next, the memory endures, not to honour, but to guard. And in that memory lives a promise that the future must never look like the past.